You know, I have often admitted that if we lived in a sane society, not a perfect one, but merely a sane one, then I wouldn't have a job. At least I wouldn't have this job, because my job at present consists largely of saying very obvious things that would not need to be said in a country where sanity reigned. Things that, if they were said in a sane country, they'd be met with yawning, slightly bemused reactions. People would respond, "Yeah, and? Why are you telling us this?" And they get back to their lives. But because insanity rather than sanity reigns here, it is necessary to state the obvious. And the obvious, when stated, will nearly always be met with screams of horror and breathless denunciations from people who believe that there is nothing so offensive as a thing that is obviously true. And that brings us to the latest controversy, the latest firestorm that I find myself in the middle of. It began last week on this show when I dedicated Thursday's daily cancellation to a so-called divorce coach who, among other things, advised women that if their husbands have grown unhappy or bitter through the course of their marriage, it's because the husband was always an angry person whose mask has finally fallen off. Now, I countered that it's certainly possible that a man might fool his betrothed by donning a mask which slips during the course of the marriage, revealing his true and miserable self. However, I suggested, a woman who notices that her husband is turning into such a person would do well to consider that his happiness might not be baggage he secretly brought into the marriage, but rather a change that has taken place during the marriage. She should think about whether she is giving her husband what he most wants and needs. She should think about whether she is helping her husband to be happy or if she is facilitating his unhappiness. And the good news, as I explained, is that the wants and needs of a man are generally pretty simple. What most men want is simply to come home from work to a wife and children who are happy to see him and grateful for him, and with dinner cooking on the stove. That doesn't hurt either. Of course, as I acknowledged during the segment, not everyone's situation is exactly the same, and even in the ideal scenario, it can't be like that every day. In fact, even in my specific case, I really like to cook, so there are plenty of days when I cook and my wife cleans up the dishes afterwards. And there are variations on this basic theme, variations that also have to account for the fact that there are plenty of households, especially in this economy, where both the husband and the wife have to work. They're forced to work, or they've decided that they have to work. So I'm not laying out a precise, unchangeable formula that must apply to everyone every day, no matter what. Rather, I'm trying to explain that in most cases, a man simply wants to provide for his family. He wants his work and his sacrifices to be noticed and appreciated. He wants his wife to love him and be affectionate towards him and care for him and respect him. And he wants his children to love him and appreciate him and respect him and be excited to see him. Whatever exact shape this takes, if a man can have all of that, he will be happy. If a man does not have that, he will probably not be happy. This is the point I made during the segment, which my team also posted to TikTok and which I reiterated in a tweet over the weekend. On Twitter, I posted this, which is what I just said. Quote, "All a man wants is to come home from a long day at work to a grateful wife and children who are glad to see him and dinner cooking on the stove. This is literally all it takes to make a man happy. We are simple. Give us this and you will have given us nearly everything we need." Okay. So that brings you up to speed. And then came the responses, which break down along the lines you might expect. Across the platforms where we've had this conversation, most men have answered either that they have exactly what I described and they love it, or they aren't married yet, but they hope to have it when they are married, or they are married and they wish they had that, but instead they come home to an unkempt, unappreciative household and a nagging wife every day. And it makes them very miserable. Very few men have said that they categorically do not desire anything resembling the situation I described. The feminists, on the other hand, have had quite a different reaction. There have been hundreds, if not thousands of outraged responses to my provocative claim that men want to be loved and respected by their wives and children. And I'll read through just a few of them, a few examples. Here's one from notorious cat lady Jill Filopovich, who tweeted, "Get yourself DoorDash and a dog and please leave women alone." Then she continues, "This manages to be insulting to women and men at the same time. And clearly if your husband is unhappy or abusive, it's your fault for not having dinner ready or being sufficiently happy. Anyway, I'm glad to know men who actually like women as people and want partnership, not a servile wife as mommy who breeds silent and compliant children and asserts no needs of her own." Elizabeth Spears, who's a Democratic consultant who made it onto this show several months ago after writing a column claiming that adoption is more traumatic than abortion, she was especially incensed. She wrote, "The kind of man who wants this believes that women exist solely to serve his needs. And in relationships where that is true, the relationship is partly about power and control, a root cause of domestic violence." Later, she posted, "This service model of relationships often doesn't work even when women want to play that role because Matt is an overgrown baby and doesn't understand that men can get all of those things and still be abusive and cheat and be unhappy themselves." Another woman in media, Jennifer Robison, who claims to not be a feminist, posted, "Your domestic tableau is creepy because it focuses only on your needs. It is you surveying your family as objects that exist only to please you, not considering that they are discrete humans with their own drives and desires." Now, there are many other responses like this, and not all from female feminists, some from the even more pathetic male variety of feminists, and all labeling me a sexist, a caveman, a backwards, abusive, troglodyte, stuck in the past, etc., and most accusing me of making additional statements that I never made. There were also comments sharing violent fantasies about my family, which I won't repeat. Suffice it to say that we live in a deeply depraved culture, one where people lash out at what is normal. They attack normalcy itself. And that's the first point I want to make about all this. Even if you disagree with what I said, either because you don't believe that that's actually what men want or because you don't think men should want it, there is no question that I was articulating a very normal, very conventional, and very traditional idea. One that most men through history can relate to, even prior to the industrial age and the invention of the 9-to-5 job. That doesn't automatically mean that you can't be critical of the man as breadwinner arrangement or of men who want to come home to a loving wife and a hot dinner. I mean, if you want to criticize that, sure, go ahead and try. But it does make you an utterly ridiculous and unserious person if you treat the concept as somehow shocking and offensive. You could try to find a reason to oppose the way that billions of men and women have chosen to live their lives, but what you can't do is treat it like some freakish, shocking, outrageous thing. By comparison, just as an analogy, lots of people like Star Wars, right? I don't like Star Wars. Now, I'm free to disagree with the tastes and preferences of the majority of people, but I would come off like a blabbering lunatic if someone said that Star Wars was their favorite movie and I reacted by shouting, "What? Are you kidding me? Star Wars? You like that movie? I've never heard of anyone who likes that." In fact, you might suspect that my argument against Star Wars is rather weak if I feel the need to overcompensate by pretending that I'm astonished to hear that the film has any fans at all. But this is all the left ever does. They treat totally normal, traditional ideas and value systems as not only wrong, but appalling and bizarre. They do this because they have no real argument against what is normal and traditional. All they have is their theatrical protestations, and they hope that that will be enough. One other thought in this vein. Note that if instead of expressing a desire to come home to a loving wife and children, if a man instead were to express a desire to, say, become a genderqueer trans woman and join a polyamorous, furry BDSM sex cult, the same people attacking him now would instead forcefully defend the validity of his lifestyle choices and preferences. That's because any and all desires are celebrated by the left, unless they are normal and healthy and traditional ones. Second point, I have been criticized for discussing what a man needs and what a man wants without saying anything about what a woman needs and a woman wants. This has been willfully misinterpreted as a claim that women don't need or want anything or that their needs and wants are unimportant. Now, I, of course, never said that, and I don't think it. I just simply didn't mention the needs of women because that didn't happen to be the subject that I was speaking about at the time. Okay? Just because a person is talking about one subject, it doesn't mean that they are denying the importance of every other subject they aren't talking about in that moment. It is, in fact, okay to talk about men without allotting equal or greater time to a discussion about women. There's already plenty of airtime taken up by conversations about women. And most of the time, when there's a discussion about relationships, it's going to be focused on what women need and what men need to do to fill those needs. And yet, if you spend even a few minutes talking about the other side of that coin, you're accused of erasing or marginalizing women. It's ridiculous. And also precisely the attitude that makes this conversation necessary in the first place. Because the attitude from a lot of people is that men are not allowed to talk about what they want and what makes them happy. Women are allowed to talk about that, but men are not allowed to discuss it. And if you bring it up, it is somehow offensive. You can't even talk about the needs and wants of men without automatically undermining the needs and wants of women. It is, again, totally ridiculous, and it's a game that I will not play. Third, many of my critics have taken special exception to my use of the word grateful. It's bad enough that I would promote, as they say, a patriarchal and sexist family arrangement, but it's even worse that I would suggest that a wife should be grateful to her husband and for the sacrifices that he makes for the family. This tweet from someone with the username VMW is typical. She says, "I'm far from what one would call a feminist, and as a woman who was a stay-at-home mom and does cook dinner most nights, even I objected to your grateful comment. Maybe it's you who should try some reevaluation of your thoughts regarding a wife's role and motivation in marriage." Well, I've got some bad news for this lady. If she doesn't think that she should have gratitude for her husband, if indeed she thinks grateful is a dirty word, then it's highly probable that her husband is unhappy and her marriage is miserable, a miserable drudgery for all involved, including the kids. Gratitude is absolutely essential to any happy marriage. And yes, that means that the gratitude should go both ways. But if you hear someone say, wives should be grateful for their husbands, and your immediate response is, oh yeah? Well, what about husbands, huh? They need to be grateful too, you know. If that's your response, then you've revealed yourself to be an emotional child, a self-centered brat, reacting like a 3-year-old who sees that her brother got slightly more ice cream in her bowl. That's not fair. What about me? That attitude is a perfect example of what a lack of gratitude looks like in practice. And it is absolutely toxic. Fourth point, finally. Rather than crying about the fact that so many men desire to come home from work to a happy and grateful family, you might take a moment to consider why they desire it, why we desire it. Now, it could be that we're all a bunch of woman-hating psychopaths who hate women so much that we married and literally dedicated our lives to them. Or it could be that we are human beings who feel that deepest of human longings to love and be loved. We want to love our families by providing for them. We want to love them by being useful to them, by giving them something that they need. This is why getting laid off or fired or forced out of work for long stretches or even retiring can sometimes be literally deadly for a man. He feels deprived of the opportunity to be useful, to love his family in an active and productive way. This is what lies at the root of that terrible, evil, patriarchal male urge to be a breadwinner. What lies at the root is his desire to give to those he loves. How awful, right? What a terrible thing. And yes, he also wants to be loved. He wants to know that his efforts are noticed and appreciated. He wants a warmth and love and affection and gratitude and respect from his wife. And if he doesn't get it, he'll be unhappy with a pain that he feels at the deepest levels of his soul, but which he may never speak out loud for as long as he lives. I mean, a man won't usually say any of this out loud, especially these days when he's certain to be shouted down, if he dare verbalize any of it. But it's the truth. And those who try to stop us from acknowledging this truth or talking about it, they are the ones who are today canceled. And that'll do it for this portion of the show. Move over to the members block. Hope to see you there. If not, talk to you tomorrow. Godspeed.